I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Don't you know it's all I have?
For better or worse, one thing that comes with all the faith deconstruction going on these days is that a lot of people are leaving or changing the church they attend. Nathan has some great advice for those leaving, for those who are left, and for the leaders of churches. Wherever you happen to fall on that list, this episode is for you.
All these battles that I thought you wanted me to win.
Thank you very much.
But
Sure, man.
you only
Got your
wanted
back.
love.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Rats, I'm like 1 for 5 on that.
That's
There's a stereotype about Enneagram 5s, which is Enneagram is made up, but I'm an Enneagram 5. And one of the stereotypes is most likely to come home and find them trying to read in a completely dark room. Like
What?
Yeah.
That's awfully specific.
But I read that on like a, I don't know, Instagram thing, or maybe it's in a book. But that happened when Daniel lived with me. That happened all the time. My brother Daniel
Really?
would come in, and all the lights would be off, and I'd be upstairs like with a book, squinting at the light, because you just like it's a like not very aware of your physical surroundings type.
Oh, okay. Just kind of doing your own thing.
So it's like, well, this is painful, but I guess I'll just not do anything about it. And, it happens slowly, like the frog in the pot analogy. So
That's funny.
yeah, lights are on. It's snowing.
Not sure how I feel about the snow right now.
Yeah, late April snow is when it's no longer wonderful and beautiful to me anymore. It's like, okay. Now it's just dragging me back into the doldrums of winter.
This too shall pass.
Yes. How are you doing?
That's pretty good. I made the mistake of starting to clean up my office. And by mistake, I mean now it's way worse than it was before.
Yeah. You clean like me.
Well, my wife and I have this horrible habit of like piling things up, and when things pile up, like things we need to file, bills, insurance cards, whatever. After they get to a certain size of pile, we ended up like sticking them in a drawer or like in a bag in the closet. So
Oh no.
my floor of my office is like covered in envelopes that I'm sure there's like somebody's going to be coming after us for something.
Right. I was going to say the most terrifying thing you could do, but also possibly the most liberating, is just throw an entire pile away. Like, I wonder what's in that. I wonder if anything's important. Well, let's throw it away and we'll find out.
We definitely will find out.
Yeah. It turns out something was very, very important. But yeah, I am very much like that.
Yeah, so hopefully I will get done. I'm one of these people. I don't know about the Enneagram stuff. I haven't figured that out for myself yet. But I'm one of these people who's really good at starting stuff. I can start stuff all day long.
Yeah.
But getting it finished it takes a lot of like willpower.
Yes.
I mean, when I'm done, I'm like, yes, I'm done. Well, what else can I start and not do?
Yeah. Why finish something when you could start something? That's what I
Right.
say.
Starting is a lot more fun.
It is. Yeah.
It's where the ideas happen. You know?
I wish I had a finisher, like, okay, you get the point. Yada, yada. I figured it out now. Now carry it on until completion, please. I need
Right.
a butler.
That's what butlers are good for.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I think tonight we're actually going to talk about something that's a listener-requested topic, right?
Yeah. I feel like it's a listener-requested topic that many of our listeners are asking the same question.
Yeah.
Part of it is I think there's been a lot of curiosity about both of our stories and our listeners seem to be really good at picking up on parts that I just leave out. They're like, wait a minute. So maybe I leave them out for a reason. But we've gotten a lot of questions about leaving a church. And they've come in different forms. When is it okay, or what is your advice, or a lot of them are just asking, like, have you left a church? I think because a lot of our listeners are in that uncomfortable space where they either have left a church and now they feel like they're alone going through that, or they don't know if they should, and they're considering it. Just lots of those in between people in that very uncomfortable space. So I would like to start by asking a very awkward personal question to break the ice.
Uh-oh.
Have you ever broken up with anyone?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have.
Have you ever been broken up by someone?
No.
What? Steve, man. I counted mine and it's like 10, Steve. I've been broken up.
I didn't date a lot in high school.
Yeah, these were all Heather. These was
10 times with Heather.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't date a lot in high school, but I think when it came to dating, I was always very, very cautious. And so I would tend to not, I don't know if this is the controlling nature in me, but I guess I didn't get in relationships with people who would break up with me. I don't know. I'm sure there's some ex-girlfriend out there listening, like screaming at me.
Yeah.
All the horrible thing. I'm also really good at blocking things out that I don't like to remember. So.
Well, their third option is the fizzle. So, I've been broken up with a lot. I've broken up a lot, done it all kinds of good ways and bad ways. But for a long time, my preference was the fizzle. And that's where you end up not together, but there's not a breakup.
So yeah, that did happen to me a few times. Like, I remember dating a girl in college. Went out a couple times, and then I tried to get another date with her, and she just ignored me, and just kind of like,
yeah,
kind of
that's
a ghosting
a ghost
thing.
That's what we call. Yeah, it's a ghost.
So it's not really a breakup, just never really happened thing.
Right. Yeah. I was a avoidant person, and I've been fizzled out upon or ghosted, but also there's definitely people that I just like took the opportunity. Maybe I was moving, or maybe I was moving on, not literally but figuratively, and you just avoid and hope the problem goes away. It's right. Usually not a good philosophy in life, but definitely learned a lot from that. So some of the things I learned, here's my breakup advice from really someone who you shouldn't take any relationship advice from, but it's gonna come back. I'm gonna bring it back though. So it's better, advice piece number 1. This is a hard one. I'm starting with a really difficult one, but it is better to be honest than to avoid awkwardness.
Yeah.
It's very difficult because there's a truth that needs to be spoken, and if you don't speak it, one of my worst breakup stories, me being broken up with, was when the person complimented me so much during it that I didn't realize she was breaking up with me.
No way.
Yeah, I was like, this is nicer than you've ever been to me. This is like 5 compliments in a row, but I was in between that was, we shouldn't be together. But so then next breakup advice from Nathan: give them space and don't text them at 2 a.m.
This sounds very awfully specific.
It's very good advice though for breakup, and it's going to apply later. And then give yourself time You've got to acknowledge what you're going through and feel it.
Okay.
Don't jump right into something new. It's a bad idea. Once you do jump into something new, don't bring your past baggage with you. You don't want to be the person on the first date that's talking about your ex the whole time.
Oh, yeah. Makes
or
good for makes for good sitcom fodder, but
it does, yeah. But not for good relationships. Don't isolate yourself. Lean on community. And then, of course, with any breakup, they're all different. But it's a time to learn. The reason matters, and it's almost never all about them or about you. It's usually a lot of both, and it's a very good time to learn. And there's all kinds of reasons why people do that. So one of the things that I learned, though, is how to deal with the emotions that happen when you end a relationship like that. And a congregation is nothing like that kind of relationship. So the analogy breaks down very, very quickly. But I do think one thing that I have observed is that there are natural times when leaving a congregation is painless. There are times when it's socially acceptable to leave a congregation that you've been going to for 10 years. And those times are things like you move. When you move, you announce it. People clap for you. You get a songbook signed. You get a cake. And it doesn't matter so much where you're moving towards. You could move and then stop going to church, and you still get the cake, right? They don't take it back. Or you could move and you could choose a different denomination, or you could, there's all kinds of things you can do, but it's just this time that's socially acceptable.
right.
There are a very small handful of other socially acceptable times when that break kind of makes sense.
Yeah, because in those times, like moving away, that's socially acceptable because you're not leaving because of the church or because of the people at the church. It's like a life change thing, and so it's not it's like, hey, nothing personal. It's not personal. It's business.
That's exactly it. So I was trying to think of the other couple of times that are acceptable, and I had trouble classifying them, but that's exactly it. It takes the ego out of it, or it takes a judgment feeling or anything like that. And it's kind of like the boyfriend going off to college now. It's like,
right.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'm moving on, but it was a great thing. It was a great thing while it lasted.
If I'd have stayed, we'd had a future together. Who knows what might happen?
Exactly. And who knows what's going to happen in the future?
Right.
The future is still there. But many of the other times are less natural. But I wonder if a challenge to churches would be like, is that the way it has to be? And is there maybe a less damaging way for this to happen? And so my story is not going to be very satisfying to a lot of our listeners, because I got away with kind of a 11th hour natural excuse.
Okay.
So the church here in town that I attend is the one that I grew up attending to and my family goes to. So 30 years of history at this congregation. I'd gone away, I came back, and kind of came back at that low part in my life. And it's not necessarily the congregation I would have chosen as far as where I'm most comfortable or where I agree the most, but that it didn't matter to me a whole lot because my family went there and my friends went there. So it was for me, it wasn't about that it was the kind of worship that I prefer or anything like that. And it was great to be among people who knew my whole story at a dark part of my story, because it helped. I think that helped me to be more open with people and brave with people, but they were also, more accepting and loving of me as well. And then I was leading a small group and realized that I was pretty close to getting married. And so I made a plan, and my, people who know me know that when I do go to church, my family is there, and I just hide behind them the whole time. I physically hide behind them. I sit next to them. I talk to them because I'm just a little bit nervous about. It's like my security blanket,
Yeah. As an aside, I never once got that vibe from you.
Well,
I just thought that he really likes hanging out with his family. Isn't that nice?
And I do. I do really like hanging out with my family, and my son is hanging out with his uncle or his grandparents, and it's just help during the sermon when he's wanting attention and when I want to listen or whatever. So, but I knew that when I was married, I didn't want to spend every Sunday sitting next to my parents, going to only my parents, for lunch every Sunday.
Right. You feel like you're gonna have to, like you have to go with them to lunch because they're family.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're not great conversationalists. They're their choice of food is abhorrent. Just kidding. It's a blessing in it, and I'm friends with my parents, so that's very helpful. No, just had the feel like I felt like it was a step towards growing up. Was let's be our own people, not
right.
Their kids. We'll just be our own selves and have a little bit more distance and balance, right? So
sure.
And then it's not me making the church choice, it's us making a choice together. So anyways, the small group season was wrapping up. My co-leader moved away, and I knew I was close enough now that by the next season I was going to be in that time. So I told the elders I told them this is my plan. Planning on stepping down from this. I'm getting married. I think that's going to be a natural time for me to branch out and start to learn how to be an adult Christian.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a natural way for me to step down from that. And then my plan was to keep going until the wedding, and the wedding was postponed because of COVID. And so I personally didn't have any strong catalysts to get me out. But I also kind of had kind of a hall pass written for me, like, they know this is coming, and it's no hard feelings because I said it, a year ago.
Right. No hard feelings when you told them either?
Yeah, no. I think it was maybe at a time when it was kind of difficult and we were hurting for getting people to step into that kind of a role.
Oh, yeah.
So there might have been a little bit of practical, like, oh, rats, now we've got to, find someone else. But but it was almost like leaving a job to go on a sabbatical instead of leaving a job to work for a competitor. It's like, hey, I'm going to leave in 6 months. It's for a good reason. It's kind of like, shucks, we'd love to keep you, but that makes sense.
Okay.
The rest of my story is more messy, but I feel like it's maybe not mine to tell. Because my family did have a catalyst and did leave, and so their leaving story is maybe a story for another day. But so I've been experiencing what they're going through with them, and then also just lots of kind of like we mentioned in the deconstruction episode, there's kind of lots of people struggling right now and lots of people questioning things.
Yeah.
So, and one of, probably a minority of people are struggling, and then some of those people are leaving churches and then going through that. So it's a thing I've been paying attention to.
Yeah.
Some of the questions that have come in, I just cannot answer, or I just don't feel like I've got the answer. So I want to be a little bit careful not to give advice about, like, when should you leave your church, or when is it okay to leave a church, or any of that, because I just don't really know. it's a thing that I think about a lot. When is, is it ever okay? When, if it is, when and how should it be done? But I do have some perspective I can share just about what I think church is supposed to be about in the first place. But because there have been all of these voices that are individually reaching out to us, I feel like we can kind of tell you you're all going through very similar things, and kind of what to expect. So, but I'm going to make up some vocabulary here. So I'm going to use church to mean Sunday morning, physical building, congregation.
A specific local congregation.
Yeah, specific local congregation where you can be in a phone book. You can bring a potluck to this place. That's a church.
Okay.
The kingdom is just what God is trying to do and God's reign. And then a kingdom community is my trendy word for, it's not a church, but it's people who are gathering and coming together because their connection is that they're part of the kingdom.
Okay.
Churches know this, but when somebody is leaving, or even if you're leaving a church, this is the moment you forget that the kingdom is much, much bigger than the church. The church hopefully is in the kingdom, and the church hopefully is a kingdom community.
Mm-hmm.
But no kingdom community and no church is the kingdom.
Right.
The kingdom is probably vastly different and larger than we can see. It's international. It spans time. It's 4-dimensional, and it's what God is doing and what we're praying for God to do when we say, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." So I feel like for all of us, it's important to remember that the church is not the kingdom, and sometimes it's more important for someone who's left or who's on the outside to remember that. But sometimes it's good for the people who are on the inside to remember that. Oh, the church isn't the kingdom. The church is the church. This is church A, but there's church B and church C and kingdom community Z, and that's the kingdom.
Yeah. Even with your preamble of like, here's my vocabulary, I'm still like my gears are grinding a little bit, just because growing up my entire life, the term the church has always meant the kingdom, kind of interchangeable. And I totally know what you're saying, and I agree with where you're going, but I wanted to call that out because I'm probably not the only person having the problem right now.
And so I should be more explicit. I'm making this up right now just so it's easier to talk about it, because I don't want to say like physical church or little C church or something over and over again. So yeah. I use the church and the kingdom or the body. Those are all synonyms in my opinion. But just since we're talking when we talk about this, the emotions and the journey and the pain of leaving a church, I think it's more important to focus on a local congregation. So, mostly I want to talk to leavers, people who are in the process of leaving a church or are considering leaving a church or are leaving or left a church. Here are some things that I have seen from that community, and also, going back to my breakup advice, it's good to be honest. Well, actually, I'll skip ahead. So I did an informal poll of people who had left, and I just asked them, what do you wish you had done differently? And the responses were all over the board because of the circumstances and the emotions and the connections were all over the board. Some people, when they leave a congregation, are also maybe leaving a tradition their entire family holds into. Some people have been there a year. Some people have been there 30 years. Some people are leaving because of abuse or because of scandal or some really divisive, painful thing. So, here's just some examples. A lot of people said, not leaving sooner. I wish I had left sooner. Maybe I was in that deconstruction stage and I just stayed there for so much longer than I wish I had. Not reporting abuse, which, by the way, you should always report abuse. I understand why people don't, but some people said, I wish I had been more open about it. I wish I had told more people. I wish I had written a letter saying why. I wish I had talked to my friends about it. Some people said, I wish I had been more shut about it, and I wish I hadn't been so open. I wish I had moved on quietly. I wish I had fizzled out. Some person just bluntly said, I wish I had just moved away. It would have been easier to move away than to stay, but to leave my church. There's a lot of people who stayed because they felt guilty, or people who left but then felt very, very guilty and kind of went back and forth over and over again. And I think it's just also important to acknowledge that what I've seen and what I felt is a lot of loss, a lot of grief. There's resentment. It's traumatic. There's, so if there's things leading up to like, I need to get out of here, I think the temptation is you're going to feel like once you're out that the problems are all gone.
Like that's going to fix everything?
Yeah, like that's going to fix everything. And so I think a lot of people don't expect to encounter the loss and grief that they run into, and that's something I've seen a lot. But with that pain comes a lot of resentment, or like I want to be vindicated. I want someone to acknowledge that I was right to do this, or I want someone to say I'm sorry, or I want someone to nobody reached out. I went here for 30 years. These are all my closest friends, and I haven't gotten a single phone call. And dealing with like, what does this mean? Was I written off completely? Was this the only reason that we were friends? So that, try not to speak out of ignorance, but just talking from my experience, I think as a leaver, it's extremely important to find community, whether that's people online or people you can play volleyball with, right? Just because there's going to be a huge loss of community potentially that's going to leave a really big void, and you're going to be in this grief, loss, resentment, anger, stages of grief. And it's really important to have people that are next to you when you're going through that. And I've really appreciated having that. I have that with you, Steve, but with my family or with people I know who are going through similar pain. Something that's extremely difficult and maybe impossible but I think it's good to focus on, is look forward more than backward. I think, I've definitely wanted to see vindication. Like, come on, it's this was the right thing, or this was right, but I'm being treated like an outcast. Where's the justice in that? And it's really easy to get stuck in that, but it's just not going to come. Have some thoughts about maybe why it's not going to come, but it's more like the breakup. When you break up with someone, you want them to just like say, "You were the only one. I could only survive with you. You were the best person ever." That's not what happens. It's more like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm moving on." But in a breakup, a lot of times you want to be like, "Oh, come on, don't you admit that you were wrong to break up with me," or you want to have that feeling, or I've been.
You don't want to break. You want to break up with someone and for them to go, oh, finally.
Yeah, it's so much better. Yeah, it turns out.
Or be completely nonplussed, like whatever.
Okay, yeah.
See you tomorrow.
Were we even dating?
Yeah, you want them to be like, we were meant to be together.
Yeah, no. It's like, thank you. I know it's hard, and I know that I'm perfect, but you're not as perfect as me. So it's that desire for vindication, for validation, is just not going to come. It will not come from the church, and it. But you're going to really want it to.
Yeah. And
some stuff that I've been using for that is I think about Jonah a lot, because especially people who leave because they think they have a really good reason, you're going to feel kind of like the one person crusader, and you're doing something very difficult that bears a lot of personal pain, and then you're going to get out of it and then in that moment, it may be that you completely were just and you were doing the right thing, but that moment when you turn around and hope that the congregation falls apart without you is a little bit like Jonah waiting for Nineveh to be destroyed, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a bigger deal to you than it is to them, possibly. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, again, it's like looking at an ex that suddenly is successful and happy family and great job and great life, and being sad about that. But your success or failure, or your closeness to God or distance from God, or even whether you were right or wrong, has no correlation to how well a church does after you leave it. And skipping through to the end point, love your enemies, this is the time, like immediately as soon as you get out of a place is when they turn into your enemies, and you're supposed to be praying for their success again, which is impossible, but also very, I think very powerful. So I think one step there is I've been trying to learn to trust God instead of pull the pillars down myself. I don't need that vindication, or I don't need a hope for bad things, and it's that turns into rot inside me and stays with me. So praying for that little C congregation that you left, to start doing the immediate work on your mind and your heart. And that I should have said earlier that breakup analogy of you need some space is very important here. So I think going through those emotions, whether it's loss or sadness or hurt or bitterness, whichever direction it goes, whether it's kind of sad or angry, the loss feeling, it is important to go through that for a while, but not to sit in it for so long that your preoccupation is that place instead of where are you and where are you going.
So yeah, so you said, I forget how you phrase it. Look forward more or something.
Yeah, look forward more than back.
More than back. And is that out of a? I totally get where you're going, but is that more of for the reason of just like clean break, like establish a new thing, quit trying to hold on with shoestrings to the old thing as well? Is it to help you move on? Or, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm not making any sense here because I'm trying to figure this out for myself too. So
right, yeah. So
I'm one of the people you're talking to. So
the two elements of that are really important to me. So the look forward for me is, I think it's important to be thinking about what is next for you.
Mm-hmm.
So what is next for me is I have been trying to learn to take more of my cues and more of my energy from communion with God instead of the constant and restless just like effort that I'm putting into. So I recognized that what I needed to do was not go to any new churches because I was not ready for that.
Right.
But working on my plan forward was to start to get that peace from God again, where I don't feel depleted all the time, but I'm working currently on time to let God fill me up, which for me is like breathing, prayer, and reading scripture, without trying to do something with it afterwards, without trying to turn it into, a tweet. And then again, looking forward for me has been, what have I learned about what role a church should fit in my walk? So personally for me, looking forward was the realization that my church, my congregation, was almost 100% of my kingdom work, 100% of my Christianity. But God worked 6 days and rested one. He didn't rest 6 and work one. The kingdom, as opposed to a Sunday morning worship, the kingdom is going and moving, and I was not a part of that other than my participation in that kingdom community. So for me, that almost, the bitter way to say it is, do you know what? I was hurt so much by this, I'm not going to let that be such a big deal for me ever again, right? I'm not going to let that church be so much of my identity that it can shake me that much. But that's kind of the unhealthy version, because I do want to have kingdom ties with people in a physical building that are the same ones regularly meeting. In the looking forward and learning phase, I realized there's so much that I want my whole life to look like, and I think that's going to, and so I'm just listening and trying to figure that stuff out, and then thinking about what would it look like if I was going to engage with a congregation again. How would I go about that? So that's the forward, like as the positive stuff, but not looking back for me has been, I almost instantly turned a group of people that are nuanced and wonderful and have lots of wisdom and all kinds of things into a caricature overnight. When I went from being an insider with them to being an outsider looking in. And I could probably spend all of my energy and my intellect and my criticism poking at that and prodding at that, and I think that if people are like me, that the temptation to stay in that backward looking spot would be strong.
Yeah, I mean, it's a natural thing when you move on from one place to another, whether it's a job or even moving to a new city to live or whatever. It's kind of the natural process of the separation to, I think, unconsciously, to think bad about the previous place, because then it makes all the changes easier to deal with, because the changes are coming. You've made your choice. You've made the decision. We're moving on. And, it may take a lot of time to get past that. But when we're talking about other members of our kingdom family, I share your concern of sticking with that negative side too long, or even indulging in it much at all. I mean, I'm not saying you can't, because, like I said, part of the grieving process, but trying to just, I guess, realizing that that's what's going on. And
that's what I mean.
Maybe they're not all actually evil people, but
right. But it's gonna feel that way because of pain or or grief or something.
Yeah.
So that's what I recognize, because I know the people where I went to church, and because I was aware of how I thought of them and how that changed, and I know that they didn't change that way. I changed in what I was bringing to the front of my mind that was maybe always there. And I think I personally do think a goal of, if you have to leave in an unnatural time, the eventual goal is to have restored fellowship with that group, but when you're completely gone from it. So I think it would be healthy to be able to be friends with those people, or to think fondly of them, or to wish the best for them. It's hard to speak broadly, because there's people leaving because of abuse and scandal, and that
Sure.
I don't really think the same way about that kind of stuff. That's more like, don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of stuff. But as I would say people who are leaving and don't know what it means for their faith, or people who are leaving and in the kingdom, sitting for too long and looking back into that congregation and kind of rehashing it, or thinking about that pain is going to start to rot, and doesn't produce good outcomes, in my opinion. But it's extremely tempting. I have done this with, there's a company that I left on bad terms,
Mm-hmm.
and I want them to fail.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is, I drive by that place every day, and I'm friends with them on Facebook, and they're fine. They're doing just fine, even though it was an unjust situation. When I think back, I think of horrible management, of rude and malicious people who are incompetent. And it's been, 7 years, and I want them to fail still. And they're the fact that they're still around, they're not succeeding very much, so that gives me a little bit of pleasure. But the fact that they've survived steals a little bit of joy from me. But that's not a them problem. That's a me problem.
Yeah.
That's me holding on to this idea of vindication. I don't know what vindication means, but I'll call it backwards justice. Back then I was right, and now I want you to acknowledge it in the present. Is that what vindication means?
Kind of. Like, they got what they deserved, and now you are confirmed in your beliefs.
Yeah, I want it to be clear who is the winner and who is the loser, who is in the right and who is in the wrong. But what the real truth is that in some cases there's probably not an answer to that. Sometimes there's someone completely in the right, but I would say a lot of times it's a little bit more, it's more gray than it feels in retrospect.
Yeah.
And it's a painful thing. I think it's more painful if it involves maybe I'll save that for the next section. But another thing for leavers that I think is important is to remember back to when you were at the congregation and somebody else left.
Mm-hmm. That's really good advice.
It's going to do two things. And it's going to, suddenly you're going to remember that people did leave. Like, wait a minute, this family left. And what did I think about them? Or what did I say about them? Or did I ever hang out with them after that? Did I ever call them? Did I even give them much of a second thought? So thing one is, how did you react to them? And I think that helps soften that pain a little bit, because I think often the answer is, when I was at a congregation and someone left, I didn't reach out to them, and I didn't call them, and we don't get coffee. But it wasn't because I was thinking ill of them. for me, there's plenty of people who left that I probably didn't notice they left.
Yeah.
There's some people who left that they just left the common thing we had together. Like the only reason we're hanging out is because we're both in the same place on Sunday. And if I left or if you left, like we didn't have any things we were doing outside of that. We weren't also fishing together. And so from one perspective, it feels like all of my friends stopped hanging out with me. But from another perspective, it's more like, oh, the only time I hang out with these people is church activities. And so if I'm not going to that same church, we're not going to hang out. So then reach out to them. If there are those people that left and you suddenly realize maybe I did think ill of them. Maybe I did think, well, they were, I never thought they were true believers anyways. Or, yeah, they were kind of backsliding. Or, yeah, I did know they had those problems. Maybe you were stuck as an insider, seeing them as an outsider. And now you finally have the ability to see them as a common, right? You can see it from their perspective now, and it's a little bit convicting for me to think back on what did I think about when people left. And I'm like I said, I'm someone who doesn't call people even that I'm friends with, but but it's a common thing that leavers say is nobody reached out to me, and people have shut me off, and I think that happens. I think sometimes people actually shut off, either because they're actually excommunicating them, or because they're also hurt as people who are left behind, and so they want to be vindicated too and be shown as right, and so there's a distance that gets added there. But I think a lot of it is it helps to realize, like, oh, but I did that to people sometimes on accident, so maybe it's not all malicious.
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot because, as we've talked about, growing up in kind of a very conservative, kind of exclusivistic church, when people left, people say, well, they left the church. And like I said earlier, I interchangeably used the church and the kingdom together. And so when I was a kid, maybe this is an accidental learned thing. When people said, well, they've left the church, I assumed that meant that they have left God. Like, the fact that they don't go to this congregation anymore means that, you might not see them in heaven. If they're lucky, maybe they'll show up at another Church of Christ, and everything will be better. And like we said, there's a lot of people in the Church of Christ that don't think that way, but as growing up as a kid, that's kind of how I saw things. And I remember when I was a kid, I think it was in college, maybe, a very dear friend of ours, he was actually a former elder at our congregation. He and his wife left and went to another, quote unquote mega church or whatever in town, and that hurt. And I wasn't even here. I was like in Oklahoma, and I found out about this, and I'm like, oh, and I felt like they had betrayed me, and so I've experienced a lot of negative views of people who have left, and now that I'm kind of in this situation, I'll be honest, I'm afraid of people thinking that about me and about you and your family and things like that, because not everybody's thinking that way, but I know some people are.
Yeah.
And I mean, on the one hand, I can't control what people are thinking. There's just no way. But on the other hand, I still feel this connection to them as family, and I don't want them to feel that way. Because I'm not mad at people.
Yeah, that's the an emotion I have, is that I'm kind of caught up in some of this, but this group of people is practically like a family reunion for me.
Yeah.
I know, in some ways, I know more about these people than I do know about my extended family. I have spent the last 30 years of my life being pretty open in front of these people, but also knowing about their personalities, the things they like, the things they don't like, and just the things happen to people over 30 years. And so going through that with people, there's vindication is maybe the negative emotion for this, but you also just want no hard feelings. Like, hey, right. These are people that are valuable to me, and that are many of whom have given me support or advice or that I've looked up to, and so it's a sad moment to. I think thinking about those people who have left, I think that helps drive towards a solution to this problem, because there's so many different reasons for leaving. Just like there's so many reasons for breaking up. And my best friend told me, after the 10 failed relationships, I'm exaggerating that number, but it felt like 100. You're the common element in all of these failed relationships, Nathan, right? Because every single one, I blamed the other person, and probably the things I was pointing out were correct, but I was not spending very much time wondering, hey, I wonder, what's wrong with me that I have trouble with this. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a church, and 100% of the people who left you, it's because there's something wrong with them, that's probably not, it's just statistically probably not true. So what that means is that you're ignoring the chance to release some of that feeling of like there's something wrong with them, they're falling away, or it's a statement against us, because that's just not the case all the time. But even when it is, it's still a good chance to look at what's like, well, is there any truth to what they were saying, or even just how can we expand our view of the kingdom so that it's not so painful that these people are at the mega church next door, or when they've left, but we can see the fruit in their lives is clear, that they are followers, that their kids are followers, and they're and honestly, the advice that I've given most people is, if you don't have to, don't do it, or you should move, because if you move, you get a cake. So it really is. It's almost like talking about what happens when you go through divorce, because it's not that I recommend divorce. It's more that divorce happens. Yeah. And sometimes there's probably a very good reason for it, and sometimes there's maybe a good reason for it, and sometimes it's not, but it's not really mine to tell. But there's still a right way to move forward through it as someone who's left. Not a right way. I don't mean there. So for the people who've left, it's kind of like saying there's a right way to grieve. So I take that back. There's not a right way to grieve, but it's good to know that you're grieving.
Yeah, it's good. I think that's a good analogy. I mean, because some of it's like a direct analogy, or not an analogy at all. Because there's a lot of grieving with this, but I think noticing that you may have these feelings, and noticing that these things may happen, it's like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. And so that can really help in any situation, just to know what may come. And none of this, people may end up leaving a congregation that they've been at forever, and none of this happens at all, and people are like, oh, sorry to see you go, but we'll have, still want to hang out with you sometime and whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's good to keep in mind.
So then, talking to people who are left behind sitting in the pews, I think that's also a confusing and it can be a very painful time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, for people who are leavers, it still is helpful to get into the headspace of these people. Sometimes there's just bitter, immature name calling or whatever. That stuff happens, and there's people who have gone through that kind of stuff. But so there's the leavers, then the left, and then I'll talk to the leaders in a little bit. So the left, I think, especially in churches like the Church of Christ, where being right about things matters so much that it some things are heaven and hell type things. That's a kind of mindset that, if knowing that someone disagrees with you, can feel like has the ultimate repercussions.
Yeah.
Right. So there's
disagreeing on an idea.
Yeah. So when someone leaves, that you're going to feel that as a rejection, either of, maybe the leavers think they're better than me, and they found the right answer and the wrong answer is where I am. Or maybe they think they've got a better way of doing things, or maybe they disagreed with a thing, and so especially if you hold that in a high view, that's going to make it very difficult to stay in loving relationship with those people. But that's just not the case. It's there are Christians in this city that never left their church, that your friend left your church and went to, and you don't think twice about those people, right? The ones who never were in your church and left it, but the ones who were just always in those churches.
Yeah.
But it's hard to think about the leaver in the same way. It's hard to not take it personally, and even taking that to a further point, taking it as like, well, are they being saved or am I? Which is, of course, not.
It's got to be one or the other.
Yeah, one or the other. But that's not it. There's a really common thing that I thought, and I did this to one of my best friends growing up. His family left, and I saw it as, they're not strong, they fell away. And then I go back, then instead of looking at the facts, I go backwards and say, well, they kind of were. I saw the cracks. I kind of saw that coming. They did say they didn't come to Sunday nights. They every once in a while they skipped this for baseball practice.
I heard him say OMG.
I heard him. That's what I was going to say, but I didn't want to say it out loud. They said, "Oh my God," sometimes. So you just know, right? I start turning the story into one that makes sense, which is that they were weak all along and they fell away.
Right.
But that specific story I'm thinking about, they didn't fall away. They went to another church and were in the worship band and active members of a body of Christ. That's not falling away. It's like if I was bitter at everyone that left my company, but I'm not. Sometimes people leave my company and find a company where they fit in better and where they can really use their talents, and that makes me really happy. But it's a lot harder to do that in a well, I think it's possible to do that in a church, but it's harder because we're not just talking about selling water measuring equipment. We're talking about things that we hold more dear to our identities, and so even a movement away or a rejection of a certain church feels like their identity is rejecting my identity as someone left behind.
And I don't think that can be emphasized enough. But what you just said, my identity is very, very much connected to Christ, and by extension, his body and the kingdom. And so those people who I have been spending and going through spiritual ups and downs with, and growing with, and things like that for the past however many years, it's a very close, special relationship. And so my identity and their identity are very, very much the same. And when you leave, that's hard. And what I would like to happen in Steve's perfect imagination world is when people move to another congregation in town or whatever, that there's support, that there's love, and like, sure, disappointment, but like, instead of this pulling away and no, I don't want to say maybe ostracizing that can happen sometimes. It'd be nice if everybody, if all the Christians would just be united, right? Yeah.
And this is very idealistic of me, but what if when that happened, the emotion was, man, I wonder what God is doing. I wonder what God's going to do in this town. Because if we're doing better and better at letting the Spirit give us our value and give us our direction and being filled up by the Spirit, we're gonna look at the Bible and see things like there's all these different body parts doing all these different things, being built up into full unity under Christ, and it's this continuous and mysterious thing. And so, it's a little bit bigger than the 300 people right here, because it's global, and I know that, but it's hard because I don't sit next to those Christians. But wow, what is God calling them to, and what is God going to do next through that person? Because the kingdom work 6 days of the week isn't at that congregation anyways.
Yeah.
It's probably, and it's good to recognize that those emotions are going to happen, but what a sad thing if every time something like that happens, it must turn into it's an us and them, an insider and outsider thing.
Yeah, just in general, one of the things that I try to emphasize to the folks who work for me is to assume positive intent when there's a disagreement that comes up at work. Like, Joe didn't check in the code like he should have. Like, he's just trying to make me look bad. Hold on.
Yeah.
Let's just assume that Joe doesn't want to make you look bad, but maybe he forgot. And it would be nice if we could try to apply that with our brothers and sisters in Christ. If they are moving to a different place or a different stage along their path, whatever that is, to assume that they are thinking about this and praying about this and trying to follow God's lead, and maybe God is leading them to someplace else. When we moved to Germany to do mission work in 2005, Christy and I very, very much felt led there by God. A very long story, but the short version is things just would align, the money would just happen to come at the right time, and all these things would it's just all the puzzle pieces fell in place. Same thing for when we had to move back to the States, or we chose to move back, I should say. All the puzzle pieces just fell in place. And now, when we're struggling with what to do next for us, for church, I'm seeing puzzle pieces falling into place. And I mean, the analytical side of me is okay, I'm just seeing what I want to see. And I'm just assuming that things that are happening are what God wants to happen or whatever. But all I can do is see what I'm seeing and try to glean God's desire for me from that.
Yeah, I mean, amen. And I am so bad at assuming positive intent. My initial reaction is when I can't find my keys, I'm in my house by myself for the next 5 days, and I'm going to lose my keys, definitely, statistically speaking, twice in the next 5 days. And the first thought that I'm going to have is that somebody broke in to my house and stole them. And there's not even like someone to blame. Like if Malachi was here, I'd be like, Malachi, my son.
Where'd you put my keys?
Yeah, where'd you put my keys? Maliciously. And so it's so hard for me not to, when there's anything that I can criticize or just pain, I do jump to this was an evil and intended. This was someone being two-sided, or this was or they want this negative thing for me. But as a hypocrite, what I want from people is to see that I don't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's definitely something that I need to work on. And I do think there's people who are going to be leaving that the puzzle pieces shatter to the floor. They do not fall in place at all.
Yeah.
And so that adds to it, though, because there's the pain and rejection from that personal feeling and that just that loss of losing that community, but also just feeling lots of painful interactions happen around that time. But then if you're also questioning your relationship with God, or you're having trouble in your job or your relationship, or just like it's just all falling to the floor, that's happening to people as well. And that makes it hard too, because it's just like, what am I doing? And these people are adding to it. And so for the people who are left behind, one piece of advice I have, and this is going to apply to everyone, because 10 years from now, you're going to be in a congregation and someone's going to leave, and you're going to remember that moment that, well, I've been there before. But just listen to people, hear what they have to say without wondering what their intentions are. Just listen to actually what they're saying. Be friends with the people you were friends with. There's several people who have gone through this, that their church will officially excommunicate them. Which is kind of like, that's how I like to break up too. It's like, well, you broke with me, then I'm going to break up with you.
Even harder.
Even worse. Well, good. You stay gone.
It's like, I quit. No, you're fired.
Excommunication, if you were a church that like regularly excommunicates people because of certain kinds of sins, I guess more power to you. But I have never been at a church that they're like, we're excommunicating this brother because of this sin. Right? So if all of your excommunication is revenge breaking up with the people who left you, you are not following the Bible, because Jesus doesn't say if someone goes to the next place, then you shouldn't talk to them. He says, talk to them. If someone sins against you, you should talk to them. Yeah. And then you should bring it up to the whole church. And then he doesn't say, and then if they still refuse to whatever way you interpret this, that you never ever talk to them again until they learn the error of their ways. No, it says you treat them like a tax collector or an unbeliever. But that's who Jesus spent most of his time with.
Good point.
It wasn't like you treat them like a tax collector and an unbeliever, meaning you never speak to them again and you can't fish with them. It just means like, oh, okay, they're not part of your body anymore. So you're going to treat the people in your body differently than the people on the outside. But it's not worse, right?
Yeah.
Tax collectors and unbelievers are not the people Christians are supposed to hate or avoid.
Yeah.
So anyways,
that's a really good point.
Be friends. You can still be friends with your friends. And if you reach out and say, let's get coffee, then it should be to listen and be friends, not to convince or convert somebody right back, especially if it's in that moment of pain, because it's just not the moment to do that.
Yeah.
And you just pay attention to the fruit of lives as well. Not so you can say like I was wrong or I was right, but I feel like it's good to have that reminder that people have fruitful, God-filled lives outside of this building. They always have, they always will. There's people in this building, we're not called to be faithful members. We're called to be faithful followers. Showing up is not what we're called to do.
Yeah.
And there's 6 days out of the week where we're not showing up anyways. And then, so there's the leavers, the left, and then leaders. I think leadership of a church, when somebody has left, or even worse, when like multiple people are leaving, where it feels like there's like just a cascade of people leaving, that's when it's going to be the hardest time as a leader to be Christ-like. Because there's going to be a gut reaction. We've talked about gut reactions. Gut reactions skip the spirit. They skip your brain and go right to action and reaction, right? And they feel more true than anything else. And the gut reaction is going to be, I've got to stop the hemorrhage, or it's going to be to be defensive. Well, wait a minute, if they're doing this, then what's wrong with us? They must, are they rejecting? And
are they going to try to take more people away?
Are they going to, or are people going to see the holes and follow their bad example? Or are, there's all these fears that come up. Reacting to those things, none of those is a good idea. None of that is Christ-like behavior to worry about what's going to happen. When Jesus shows up places, people flock to him. And so there's peace in knowing that we've got Jesus, and people are going to come to where Jesus is. We don't have to lock the doors so they can't get out. And I think there's, I don't know, I suppose the disciples who saw, this isn't the same kind of behavior, but the disciples who saw someone else performing wonders in Jesus' name, their gut reaction was, we have to put an end to this.
Right.
And it's probably because it's like, well, wait a minute, that's us, not them. And, they're going to take away some of our followers, but Jesus' reaction was not fearful. It was not from his gut. It was, hey, God, don't worry. They say they're on our side. Good. If they're not against us, they're for us. And some people, they're leaving because they're against you, but I still think that the leadership position that's Christ-like, Christ being the sacrificial servant who loved his neighbor and his enemy. So as a leader, just the important thing is take a couple of breaths to let that gut reaction go away. It's if you're acting out of fear or out of anger, or if you feel like you're holding on tight, release the grasp. It's going to be okay. Don't panic. Something really worrying that we've seen in other places is, man, if you are concealing sin or abuse, if there is sin or abuse in your leadership that you are hiding because you're afraid that it's going to make Christians look bad, do not ever do that. So I don't know if anyone will ever hear that and choose to do the right thing, but we've seen too many. We've seen lots of public examples of leaders who are trying to protect the reputation of someone, when Christ's example and as Christians' example is that we are sinful and that we're not better than other people. So we've seen that happen publicly where that's concealed, but there have been heartbreaking stories of these little groups where that kind of stuff is concealed, and then the people find out about it and they leave. And I can't think of a better reason to leave a church than some kind of a profiteering or abuse. But as leaders, don't ever get yourself in a position where you are covering up for someone, whether it's making excuses to yourself or to people. So that's, I hope nobody ever needs that, because I'm the kind of person who thinks that kind of thing never happens.
But it does.
I've just been amazed. The only time I've run into it was now when I'm listening to all these stories about people who are hurt by their local churches, and way too many of them were this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's too, when I start looking around to find, like you said, these examples, it's too easy to come across this exact situation you're talking about. I mean, on a grand scale, everybody knows about the Catholic Church hiding, sexual abuse of children for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And that seems to be coming to light and things like that, and that's good. But I mean, it happens more than we would have wanted to. Well, happening at all is more than we want it to, but you know what I mean. And
in evangelistic circles, Ravi Zacharias was the big recent example. And the thing that I think is important to stress is all of the people covering that up thought they were doing something for the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
They were seeing, some of them didn't think of themselves as what they were doing was covering up. They were just being willfully blind, or they were, it's kind of like what we heard a lot in evangelical circles, talking about Trump, that we didn't hear very much with Clinton, which was like, do you know what? No one's perfect. David was a man after God's own heart, but he committed adultery. It's very easy to give yourself an excuse and then say it's going to be better for the kingdom. This leader is effective.
It's for the greater good.
It's for the greater good. So if you are a leader of a church, it's never for the greater good. We are not called to be effective. We're not even called to be like perfect examples. We're called to be Christ-like.
Right.
And Christ doesn't care if you're successful or if you look good, but he really cares if you are hurting people and covering it up. So, anyways, that was it's the kind of thing I never expect to see it. I never expect to know anyone who has been through this, but it was so painful to see it so much. So that's in the category of right out. Like, yes, you should be loving of people who leave you, whether they become Wiccans or they become Catholics or something in between, because we're called to do that. But you should also be taking this as an example to learn, just like the other three, the leavers and the left and the leaders should all learn anytime this happens, just like I thankfully eventually learned from my breakups, right? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be with? And also, how you got to be a little bit mean when you break up. That's one thing I learned, is no compliments during the breakup speech. But it's a time to learn, and we're not in charge of the numbers. God is going if God's Spirit is moving in the church, and that is the reason for the church, and that is fueling everything the church does, then we can relax a little bit and not have to hold so firm a grasp, because God is going to provide that increase, or the movement, or the decrease, or the whatever. Fear has no part of that equation because it's replaced by trust and faith.
Yeah, we tend to take a lot of responsibility on ourselves for other people. And that's, going through all of this deconstruction, where do I go to church, all this stuff. And on top of the politics and the mess of the past year with friends and family and all that, I've been really working on trying to not take responsibility for how other people feel about me. Of course, when you're in a relationship in a community with people, there's some level of that, of course. It's kind of how we help make each other better, partly. But there are times when doing what is right, or doing what you feel that you need to do for your family or for your own health or for whatever it is, that people are not going to be happy with you. And you know what? People are just not going to be happy with you sometimes. There's not a lot you can do about that.
Yeah, that happens when you leave jobs. It happens when you break up. And it's, I always try to say, if people are upset with you, it's not proof that you're doing something right. That's the worst possible proof to use. There's some people who really enjoy, like, that means I must be doing something right, right? If the world hated Christ and everybody hates me, so I must be
I must be like Christ.
Christ-like. And it's like, no, Gary, you're just a jerk. Right? It's the proof that you test positive as if you're Christ-like, but also if you're just a jerk. So I do think the nirvana level, master level, ultimately, as much as I want to become a leader that has a more Christ-like perspective and a bigger picture, and I want to be someone in a congregation that is a little bit better at noticing when people leave and dealing with that better. I think more practically, most of it is going to be up to the people who leave. It's not really how it should be, but I think that is how it is in many places, and I pray that that's not how it is. But the people who leave, the best thing you can do after you've broken up is to run into your ex and you're both happy. Well, the very best thing is you're happy and she's miserable. But but close to that is you run into each other and you're both fine. Because it wasn't about that was, one of you won and one of you lost. You both ended up in the place you needed to be that was right, and you were not right in, together. And that's the ultimate win, is when the emotions are gone down and you're stable again, is to show back up and say, like, hey, how's it going, everyone? Great to see you, right? And to have a great Sunday and then, peace out. And that's like, that means your heart is in a good place, and it helps people to see, like, oh, maybe they're okay, right? The people left behind, maybe they're all right, right?
Yeah.
But all of the pain and the ties that are complications are all there, and there's a lot of people going through that. I think ultimately I am striving to be someone who is letting my identity, my direction, and my movement, my everything come from God, and I'm just trying to figure out how that works. And sometimes it does mean those hard things, but I think ultimately we have a hope that is a redemption that makes all that stuff make sense.
Yeah, this makes me think of, it's not exactly the same, but that makes me think of this article that my wife sent me. It's written just a few days ago. It's entitled "Losing Our Religion," written by Russell Moore.
Yes.
And it's a long article, but he talks about, why people are leaving and kind of what that looks like, and so I'll stick it in the show notes for everybody to find. But
I think I maybe sent it out through the Following the Fire podcast Twitter.
You may have.
Let me, but you should put it on the website, because we only have 9 followers on Twitter. So if you're listening to this, you're not following us on Twitter right now. That's okay. That's okay. It's mostly therapy for me. It's like me screaming in a canyon, and that's what I need. So Russell Moore, yeah, we're losing a generation, not because they're secularists, but because we believe they are. What this demands is not a rebranding, but a repentance, meaning, as the Bible always does, a turnaround. Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
There have been several long, hard-hitting articles about this exact thing.
Yeah.
Just in the past week. And then the questions from listeners, which is kind of why I felt like I should talk about it. And I'm not trying to get, I'm not trying to I'm not a homewrecker. I'm not trying to go in and be divisive or destroy churches or say that if people have it wrong, you should leave. Because I just don't have any answers about.
Well, I think that the fact is a lot of people are. I mean, in our deconstructing episode, talked about how, you may think it just seems like to you that there are a lot of people going through this now, but there really truly are. And when they do that, they end up, like the second marker was, they end up realizing that the things that they believe don't fit with where they are now. And like you said, that doesn't mean you have to leave to go to a different congregation or church altogether or whatever. But it's happening, and I think that, like, I don't know how many people are going to be left at our home congregation where we grew up when COVID gets done. I was visiting with a pastor of a pretty large church here in town a couple weeks ago. I'm like, how many people do you think you've lost? He's like, I have no idea, but it's a lot.
Yeah.
And this like a 1,500 member church, and he's like, I have no idea how many are going to come back. Partly, I mean, for lots of reasons. So yeah, so we're not trying to talk people into leaving churches. Not trying to say that you should, or maybe you should really think about it, but it's going to happen. And I think sometimes it's going to happen for very good reasons. Sometimes it's going to happen for bad reasons.
Yeah.
But I think I'm really glad, Nathan, that you addressed people who are leaving and how to be good leavers, and as well as the people who are left and who are leading those churches, because it's easy to focus on the people who leave. Or let me rephrase that. It's easy to focus on the people who you are not. If you are the leaver, it's easier to focus on the leadership that you left behind and the people you left behind.
Yeah.
And if you're leadership, you're focusing on the people who left. And then, like I said, the natural inclination is to paint those people in a bad light, if not just to yourself, then sometimes to the congregation as a whole. And that's just not helpful to the kingdom.
Yeah, and I absolutely do that. I focus on if I'm one of these, then the other two are the ones that need to get their act together.
Yeah.
But those are the two that I cannot control. I have no ability to do that, but I do have the ability where I am to I don't even know what the result is. I have the ability to have compassion for those people, to understand them, to see that pain or bitterness or whatever it is, and the reasons under it, and understand it, and turn them slowly from enemies into neighbors, both of which I have to love, and take steps that are wise and make sense,
Mm-hmm. And don't go for a rebound church.
Yeah, you don't get the first church that comes along. You're better than that. You're better than that, Joe, Martha. Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Maybe we should do a episode sometime soon about finding a church.
Finding a church. Yeah, I'm going to be in the process of finding a church, and I have all kinds of things to say about that. I've definitely turned my idea upside down of what I'm looking for, and I'm probably still wrong about that, so we should do it.
Cool. Well, thanks for your time, man. This, like I said, I'm one of the people you're talking to on this subject, because trying to figure out what to do with myself and my family, and what's best for us and for the kingdom, to be honest. Not just trying to not just come at this from a selfish perspective, which I think is easy to do.
And we're in very similar boats, and I think a lot of our listeners are as well. So keep the stories coming, whether it's you're just venting or, whatever. We really like to hear from you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from people not only who are going through this now or struggling with this, but who have been through it.
Yeah.
And who have some experience dealing with maybe the good or the bad side of things.
Definitely.
All right. Well, I will chat at you later, dude.
Sounds good. All right. Catch you later.
Wanted to hear, but it only takes a whisper.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website. Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.